Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to episode 147 of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I have with me Professor David Orozco, who is a professor in business law at Florida State University. We visit about his recent article in the MIT Sloan Management Review magazine, where he talked about legal strategies. We talk about it in conjunction with compliance and how a company can use both legal and compliance strategies to further the business. The episode comes in at just over 22 minutes. Thank you. Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox and I'd like to welcome you to this episode of the FCPA Compliance and Ethics Report. Today I'm very pleased to have FSU professor Dr. David Orozco. Dr. Orozco wrote an article which was published in the MIT Sloan Management Review last fall entitled Finding the Right Corporate Legal Strategy. I really got a lot out of that article, and so I contacted him and asked him if he could come on the podcast and talk to us about his article, sort of what he teaches, and have a general visit. And he graciously agreed to take some time from his very busy schedule to do so. So with that rather long-winded introduction, David, welcome, and thanks a lot for coming on.
Thank you very much. Thank you to you and all of your viewers and listeners and readers. It's really my pleasure to be here to share whatever insights I can bring to the table on law, compliance, and business strategy.
Well, David, you are a professor at Florida State. What do you teach?
I teach several courses here in the College of Business, actually. So that might be one of the reasons why I kind of adopt a different approach to legal issues is I'm not teaching at a law school. I'm actually teaching in the College of Business. And that's been something I've done throughout my career is teaching in business schools rather than law schools. Although I am, for the first time this time, really venturing over to the law school. I'm teaching a seminar pretty much right now for MBA students and law students. It's a course called Intellectual Property and Business Strategy, taught with FSU law professor Jake Linford, who is a copyright expert and intellectual property specialist as well. And that's just an elective right now that we're teaching that's pretty fun, actually. But I usually teach courses that are traditional business law courses, required courses for business students, both at the undergraduate and at the MBA level as well.
What's your undergrad and what'd you do your doctoral work in?
Sure. My undergrad is in economics from the NYU Stern School of Business. So I got a pretty comprehensive business background, living and working in New York and studying at New York University. I received my Juris Doctor at Northwestern University.
And I have to mention that you taught at Michigan Tech. So for those uninformed on my podcast, tell us about Michigan Tech, Houghton, Michigan, and how you got there.
Yeah, sure. So I should mention also that after law school, I spent 3 years as a postdoctoral research fellow at a center called the Center for Research and Technology and Innovation, the CRTI, which is really housed at the Kellogg School of Management. I've kind of come full circle because the faculty member who I was working with there at the time was actually a professor of mine who was teaching a course called Intellectual Capital Management with a law professor. So that's how I got exposed to really the business side of legal issues and intellectual property, the management aspects of it. So right now I'm teaching kind of a similar course here at FSU that combines business and law. So it's really kind of coming full circle since then. I spent 3 years at that research center working with those folks in intellectual property and strategy issues and research. And then after that, I took my first tenure track job, which was at Michigan Technological University, Michigan Tech. And I spent 3 years in the lovely Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Three very great years, wonderful years. I learned a lot. My intellectual property background was something that matched really well with the interests of Michigan Tech and the engineering and business programs that they have up there. So I really was able to kind of flourish up there and really develop my research and teaching up in Michigan.
David, I mentioned at the introduction your article, and frankly, it's one of the very few articles I've come across that talks about the use of a legal strategy as a part of an overall comprehensive business strategy. So if I've read that right in your article, could you tell us what led you to do your research and then write this article?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it all starts really from kind of my basic kind of perspective of the law, which is one called legal realism. That's the theoretical perspective that I really find myself situated in, and that's something I learned in law school early on, studying theory. Was that there's many different ways of viewing the law. My perspective is one called legal realism, which is the idea that really you can't understand the law unless you understand human behavior and human institutions and incentives, things that really motivate the way people behave and why they behave. So it's really kind of a very interdisciplinary view of the law. Law and economics, for example, is just an example of that.
Right.
So having really grounded myself from that theoretical perspective, I also really enjoy business a lot. As I mentioned, I studied business undergraduate and then did a postgraduate fellowship at Kellogg. So really kind of marrying law and business were kind of like, where I found myself intellectually at home. So I've always had that kind of inclination and curiosity. So really, it all started with intellectual property, looking at intellectual property from the business side. But then I became broader as I started becoming more confident in my research and asking new questions and meeting new people and just looking at things and reading things and analyzing things. I started to realize that strategy can also play a huge role in the law, and it goes beyond just intellectual property. It goes to many different things: contracts, regulation, administrative law, and it's just a really fascinating area that I've been drawn to. And I'm lucky enough to be in a setting where I get to travel and go to research conferences and also talk to practitioners a lot. And I learn from everybody. And there are a few other researchers out there who are also interested in these kind of questions. And they're colleagues of mine, friends of mine now, who I've just had great discussions with and research collaborations with at this point. So this article is actually the culmination of many years of just thought and inquiry and perspectives and learning and also sharing. And I co-authored the article with Robert Byrd, Professor Byrd at University of Connecticut, who's also a business law professor like me at the College of Business at University of Connecticut. And he had done some work on legal strategy as well. So we really just kind of really cross-pollinated perspectives and ideas. He was the original pioneer of this whole idea of looking at the law in 5 different pathways. So I basically built on that and worked with him to develop this current article.
I was very intrigued in your article the way you used one company's use of their patent portfolio. It's not only sort of a business generation tool, but taking it, transforming it into an effective legal strategy. But you didn't limit yourself to that. You came up with 5 different strategies, or at least you identified 5 different strategies. And I'd really like to the extent we can, take a little bit of a deep dive into those. So if I can just read those.
Sure.
The first was avoidance. The second was compliance. The third, prevention. 4, value. And the 5th, which is the most forward-thinking, was certainly is transformative. So why don't you go through those and describe what those steps are and where a company may be in its legal maturity or legal strategy maturity index.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, that's great. And that's really at the heart of the article, ultimately, is looking at the 5 pathways and assessing where companies ultimately fall within those and how that leads to some strategic ramifications ultimately that lead to competitive advantage, but really tying in the law as kind of a central element. So as you mentioned, there's 5 pathways ranging from least to greatest strategic focus and implication and relevance. At the bottom is avoidance, which really is kind of a scenario where managers are behaving in a way that's either intentionally avoiding the law or in a way that is strategically avoiding the law to gain some benefits, such as incorporating somewhere where there's no regulation and basically ignoring legal consequences. So usually it's a bad thing. It's typically cases like that result in front page headline news stories where a company ends up in a very bad scenario and is ultimately facing some kind of criminal inquiry or some kind of devastating regulatory process that impacts the entire company in a bad way. The next level up is compliance. And that's an area where ultimately managers understand that the law is there to constrain their behavior. They understand that the law is set up as a system of rules and that they have to comply with those rules. So they kind of, they play the game. They're not too happy with it sometimes, and they kind of, are sometimes grudgingly, complying. But they view the law as a constraint on behavior and as external rules that are then imposed on them with very little flexibility for maneuvering, right? So that's really the compliance aspect of managerial thinking. At this point, there's some strategic implications if managers engage in strategic non-compliance of the law. So right now, if you look at what Uber is doing, perhaps in some jurisdictions, without necessarily understanding fully what they're doing, but I can infer that they're taking a cost-benefit approach, perhaps, to compliance in certain jurisdictions, and ultimately tying it to some kind of larger strategic goal. But most companies, nowadays, I would think, operate in the compliance sphere. They want to comply with the law. They don't want to, have situations where there's undue risk, litigation, regulatory action. So they really do spend a lot of money and time now complying with the law. But that's still in a pathway that really doesn't lend itself to many strategic opportunities, right? So the next level up is called prevention. And a lot of work has been done recently in academia to understand how the law can be used to prevent future business risks. It's the whole growing field of preventive law and research in that area. And that is a bit more engaging and strategic in that now business people and lawyers are working together to identify future business risks and using legal processes and legal resources, using the law to basically prevent those future business-related risks. So it's not just the legal approach now, it's understanding business impact on the company and how the law can minimize that negative business impact down the road. So it's forward-thinking and it's business-oriented, which makes it different. There's also closer collaborations between managers and attorneys at this point. They're working closer. Those three pathways we identify as risk management pathways. I think one of the big contributions we make in the article is that the other two pathways really kind of cross a bridge. They cross a divide, which is moving away from risk management to value creation and opportunity generation. And at this point now, you're getting into pretty sophisticated organizational capabilities, human capital, specific individuals with very unique traits, and organizational culture that really nurtures, this type of advanced legal thinking. So at this point, you're getting into the domain of rare capabilities or rare competencies, something that then could provide, longer-term competitive advantage, things that rivals can't understand or imitate, and therefore can provide a company with that long-term competitive advantage that they're looking for. It's obviously not for everybody, as we point out in the article. Industries, have different, needs and requirements, and there's different regulatory structures. Some companies just don't have the right people or the organizational support or company culture to support that. So just to go through the other two pathways, value is the next one. And at that point, the law is used to create some kind of tangible value that can be accounted for, right? Some kind of either cost reduction or revenue generation opportunity at that point that can be, tied to an income statement, for example. And that's difficult to do. Lawyers have to be entrepreneurial at that point. They have to work closely with managers to identify those value-creating opportunities that are tangible. And resources have to be committed at that point to executing that type of legal strategy. The last pathway is called transformation. And that's one where the law is really kind of part of the corporate culture at the highest levels, and where the law really provides an essential aspect of the company's business model, which then becomes the core logic for creating value over time and sustaining that value. So when the law can become integrated into some of the core competencies or business model aspects of a company, then you have reached the transformational stage, which is extremely, extremely rare. But it happens. We've seen it happens. And it could be a big company and it could be a small company. We've seen examples of both. And they're pretty amazing when you see that happen.
In the transformative sphere, does the company have to be in a highly regulated industry for that to really work?
Well, I think for the transformative pathways that we've seen, they've typically been in unregulated industries. So it seems to lend itself that, if you're in an industry without regulation as much as others, you're in a better position to impact the legal environment. You have more freedom and flexibility to do that.
You really got a lot of great information in there, but let me start off with this. I'm a recovering trial lawyer. I was in the trial lawyer for about 20 years, then I went in-house. And the first thing I discovered was that lawyers who are in private practice have zero clue what it means to practice law inside of a corporation, no matter where they are on any pathway. And but the other thing I discovered was in-house lawyers tended to be very conservative, and they didn't really have an entrepreneurial bent or much beyond that. And so I guess my first question is, how can you train lawyers to think in these ways? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, sure. So I think one way an organization has done it is by having incentives in place for attorneys in-house, and a culture that basically says, we want you to learn the business side so that you can become more well-rounded and a strategic thinker and a partner with the overall business goals of the organization. And one way that they do that is by having kind of almost like an unspoken culture of the only way you'll really advance is by doing a rotation in a business unit and learning that side, and then coming back and translating that into other legal knowledge for the company. So there could be cultural incentive, job rotation type of incentives as well, and a culture that really kind of encourages and values that kind of cross-functional learning within the organization. I think attorneys, there's a whole range of attorneys too in terms of mindset, right? So some of them might be more traditionalists, others be more entrepreneurial and more team-oriented with the managers. So I think ultimately it requires an assessment of the individual's capabilities and attitudes as well, but also the organization needs to really kind of send signals and support that as well.
Well, then that was going to be my next question. What's management's role in moving to the more sophisticated pathways?
Yeah, so management has to be a key player as well. And this is all part of a team culture, ultimately, is executing a sophisticated legal strategy, a value-added legal strategy, even a prevention strategy requires teamwork with the attorneys. So it requires, definitely being more open to, the creative aspects of the law. I think the lower pathways are ones where managers typically tend to view the law as either a black or white issue or as just rules, whereas the more sophisticated pathways are ones where managers really understand the nuances and the gaps and opportunities that the law creates. If you're willing to take kind of a more creative approach to what are legal issues.
One of the things that I try to emphasize in my compliance space is that companies need to burn compliance into the DNA of their fabric. And I try to emphasize that compliance is really a business process because it can make your company a better run business. I don't really focus as much on general legal issues, but would that be a fair way to look at it from the legal department perspective, or does a law department have really other goals that it must answer to?
Well, I think the legal department is going to have, depending on the company and industry, a lot of different issues to deal with. Compliance is definitely going to be one of them. But I really like your approach of compliance as a business issue, because ultimately I think, compliance, the way I look at it, is not just compliance with external laws and regulations, but compliance with internal policies and regulations. Each company can create its own internal laws, and those laws can have incentives, they can have penalties, and they're going to impact the way the company operates, right? And the risk and reward ultimately of that company. So compliance is more than just external rules. It can be internal compliance as well. And that's where I think you have some really interesting strategic opportunities and business angles that can come into play as if you look at compliance from that perspective as well. So I think compliance can definitely be part of the strategy mix and integrate well with business functions, but also with the legal function as well.
David, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time, but I was wondering if you could show the audience, at least those who are watching us on video and not simply listening on audio, the MIT Sloan Magazine that your article is in, and where I found it. And which issue is that?
This is the article. This is the article right here. It's MIT Sloan Management Review. It's fall 2014, volume 56, number 1. And the article is called "Finding the." Let's see what's the title.
Finding the right corporate legal strategy.
That's right. Thank you. Finding the right corporate legal strategy. That's right.
And then finally, if anyone wanted to contact you or follow up with anything you've raised, could they shoot you an email? And if so, how would they do it?
Oh, absolutely. I am delighted to speak with industry practitioners. That's where I get a lot of ideas and feedback, and I'm very excited to extend this conversation. My email address is dorozco. That's DOROZCO @fsu.edu.
And let me give a plug to Twitter, because you and I connected on Twitter. So for those who don't think Twitter can be useful, I wrote my blog post based on your article, and you were gracious enough to contact me and thank me for it on Twitter. So shout out to Twitter for putting us together.
Absolutely. And my Twitter handle is Professor Orozco. So I'd be delighted if we connect via that medium as well.
And as I found out, you're on LinkedIn as well, and we're now connected on LinkedIn, so you could go and check out your profile on LinkedIn.
Yes, thank you.
Well, David, thank you very much. You've given us a lot to think about, and I think we're going to be continuing this conversation.
I'd be delighted to. Thank you again.